more releases. You saw the roadmap. Life is good there. What we decided to do on the two other fronts, media transport and video conferencing, we had a slew of products, but those are the only three I'm going to talk about today. What we did there was take a little bit of a step back. We identified some really critical issues with those two products. We basically found ourselves really in a much earlier toll gate, if you will, in the development process. But it's a good thing. We've stepped back, and within the transport product, which I'll talk about next, we actually made some pretty fundamental changes under the covers. For those of you who are network literate, we dumped a lot of the UDP-based traffic and moved to TCP because we were having some lost packet stuff. We went in and rewrote some drivers. We went in and added some instrumentation. It's a really different product now, okay? And we're feeling very comfortable about the timelines that we're about to announce. We've been in, with the help of the sales force and the SEs, we've been in some pilots now that are giving us a higher level of comfort. So as that all kind of matures, what you'll see is an OSS or an operations back office kind of system that is maturing to support this product, media transport. John Svetko, to put a name on product manager there, is the guy that if you've got any questions about this presentation, if I can't answer them, which is believable, John Svetko eats, sleeps, and breathes media transport. As a product manager, much like Kirk Wright for media transport, he's basically responsible for the P&L of this thing. I mean, he treats this thing as a concept of revenue thing. And if he's not doing the right thing by you, then we'll go back and fix that. All right? But here's what we'll cover. A real brief overview of what the kind of the legacy broadcast market is, and that's what this product is squarely aimed at, the installed content base. And we'll talk about what media transport is in generalities. We'll talk about two flavors of it, occasional and dedicated service, and then we'll talk about a rollout schedule and kind of a roadmap. Now, the value chain for the traditional video distributor, and we're just going to kind of break it apart in its four fundamental pieces here and show where we play. We are more than just a cheap Vivix. Okay, for those of you who came from the Vivix world, I know we have a number of them. It's a digital product with a plurality of data rates, and it also stores. I mean, it's a different animal. And we need to all understand that if we catch ourselves in a head-to-head situation selling against Vivix, we'll go back to this chart and say we're not just distribution, we're storage too. Okay, so if we spin this correctly, it's got more value than a Vivix product, but it should be cheaper. I mean, we're shuttling less bandwidth around. So if we break that market apart, that total market of $40.5 billion, look at where the pieces of storage and distribution we play in that value chain, we believe the opportunity for the current existing market, the size is $5 billion. All right, this would mean that all those folks that, well, most of the folks, you realize yesterday that were reviewed by our outside consultant that did some number studies for us, most of those guys are legacy broadcast guys. I mean, most of those guys are squarely in this market. What we're talking about are four different categories that we break these guys down into: studios, news bureaus, advertising folks, and sports content owners or venue holders. On the studio side, we're already in a couple of television folks, already in their traffic departments. What we haven't done quite right there, and I'd ask you to consider this very carefully, you can't correctly represent that picture if you're only talking to the traffic department. Okay, traffic department's a group within a typical broadcaster like a studio who basically is used to ordering TV1 circuits. Okay, they're basically just ordering a standard analog video circuit. You're going to have to go up the value chain a little bit. Okay, you're going to have to reach within that company and say, well, that's great, I'll take that order for a circuit, okay, but we do a lot more than a circuit. Also consider, even off this page altogether, once we get their bits in our infrastructure, we should be able to cross-sell them the MediaCast product and a bunch of other things too. Okay, so there should be a linkage here. But anyway, $5 billion if you go at it this way. We're into several studios, discussions with a couple of news bureaus. It was exciting yesterday to see the numbers, the opportunity numbers from CNN in this general area. Sports-wise, we'll get to some of the rough architectures, but there isn't a major event today which is not available somewhere in an analog video infrastructure that we could actually go out, sell, pick up, and basically sell them more value. What does the broadcast industry want, and how do you position this product in there? The biggest single thing on the left-hand side of this picture is, believe it or not, these guys are all about cutting costs. These are pretty much established legacy players. These are not cash cows. These are mature networks that 90% of their revenues go to the talent. These are not high-margin businesses usually. Okay, so they are all about cutting costs. So we should be able to say, look at our pricing, look at all the extra functionality, kind of a no-brainer. It's just like what Vivix and analog products terrestrial did to satellite. Should be the same kind of displacement phenomena here, where we're basically going to move them to bits on fiber and save them that much more cost. So that last box is probably one of the biggest drivers when people should look at us. What's happening, though, that first challenge is, man, there are a bunch of new players on the market. There are all sorts of different ways to slice up this content community, so it makes it a little bit tough to go after. But it is fragmenting. Makes it tough for them, too, to keep business. They're all looking for flexibility and a migration plan. They all know the web is here, and they should be saving money with MPEG and all that kind of stuff. So they're all in a need to upgrade their infrastructure pretty dramatically. Most of them are still sitting on old video switches and old video lines. One of the other interesting things to think about as you talk to any of these guys, especially the studios and some of the bureau folks, is the FCC mandate to move to HDTV. They basically, in a local station arena, by law, by a certain period of time, depending on the market you're in, you have to have all this other infrastructure up to actually broadcast on different spectrums, different signals. Most of them are basically selling out their HDTV rights in their markets and pawning it off to somebody else who's either doing the equivalent of data casting or setting up some other studios for them. But there's been a big delay. The FCC said it was all supposed to be done by now. Well, I don't think anybody owns an HDTV at home here. I mean, maybe a few of you, but they're broken, and they're being told to lay out a lot of capital here. So that's a challenge. All right. Opportunities, and this is for us and them. We saw yesterday, news and video, valuable content. Okay, it's valuable content to them, and they want to move it around to more places. All right, they also want linkages from our MPEG world into a webcasting world. So there's an opportunity for us to cross-sell there. There's also, at the same time, there is the day is now when somebody can take an MPEG-2 format and think about creating an archive. 99% of all the video created historically and internationally sits in a warehouse somewhere. Okay, so I can't go anywhere and buy the clip from NBC News the day that I was born. But all those things are physically possible now and cost effective. And consolidations is happening, which means usually in a network market. Think about some of the numbers you saw yesterday. One of the biggest opportunities are these local markets. Well, the way most large distributed broadcasters are handling this is they're consolidating their operations. They're basically putting one master control back at the head office. So if you take Fox, for example, they're rapidly doing this. They're building one master control and going to dump about 25 of them and basically consolidate. The only way to do that is with more automation and more bits. So opportunity there as well. That's kind of like where the broadcast industry is at today. Some would argue that there's a bunch of up-and-coming content on the internet that's just more appealing to the Gen X's and Gen Y's we're ultimately selling to, or even the business-to-business. I believe personally that a lot of legacy content like Hogan's Heroes reruns and Rat Patrol series and things like that, they're out there, and we got to get at them one day. Okay. Anyway, that was a personal note, not a marketing plug. Okay. So, what is media transport? Some generalities. It's a business-to-business thing. It is not to be confused with media cast. It was really designed as a way to add value and lower costs for post-production and high-fidelity broadcast video transit. Most of that's being done today by videotape and courier services. Okay. Second to that is folks using satellite. After that, Vivix, a Williams group. So this is an attempt to make it so easy for you to very immediately tailor everything from ads to do post-production on news segments to you name it, and do it in a cost-effective fashion. And as I mentioned, it's a predefined market. We know what it's worth. It's going after established business practices. All right, and it should create both it should create financially a bunch of different tools for these guys. This last point, the idea is I can now manage this according to the markets I want to go in. I turn the bandwidth knob down, or I delay the time at which my transfer takes place, and I save a hell of a lot of money. I might take, it's a trade-off I might make on a per-market basis, but that's something totally new that these guys are starting to think about working into their financial equation. Occasional use, two types of products here. We got the occasional and the dedicated. The occasional guys, virtually all of them, have at least one connection or more into what are known as the city switches or video meet-me rooms. Basically, you bring an analog TV one type product or a bundle of them into a spot downtown, big video switch, and basically someone like a Vivix manually manages or occasionally automatically manages patching this signal to that one to carry you across country or across town. Okay, so you get all sorts of people plugged into certain markets, like post houses, broadcasters, sport arenas, etc. It's also typically the spot that some folks use for egress or ingress from a satellite provider. So the point is, we know where to go, and we've provisioned equipment at these meet-me rooms. What have we deployed? Okay. We've deployed a product that allows you bandwidth on demand. So you get to schedule in forward schedule intervals, either 4, 12, or 24 hours out. You get to schedule a transmission process, point A to point B. It's done over the phone, calling our network operations folks, or I'll show you in a moment a web interface that's shortly to be available. Data rates, you get to choose MPEG-2 formats, Motion Picture Expert Group, for those of you who want a glossary on that, at several different data rates. 24 is pretty darn good, but 24 is not good enough, for example, for actual rendering of entertainment quality cinema graphs, but it's close. And we're not a term contract kind of group. So now all of a sudden the economics change. No longer am I buying a local loop, an analog TV one, and committing to a 1-year, 3-year deal. It's on demand. All right, how does it work? Now I regret that you can't see some of the text on this. But basically, content over on the left, or source on the left, sync on the right. And the way it works, flowing through the Enron network, we are actually, at this point, using some of the early concepts associated with the broadband operating system, BOSS, broadband operating system. That is primarily a state-based scheduler. So we're able to get in there over on the left-hand side and say, okay, I need to transfer this thing. It's going to run at this data rate, and it's going to run for this long. When can I do it? Do a little negotiation process, and it says, sure enough, that interval 4 hours out is open because nobody else is in there sucking up resources. Committed, go ahead, you got your reservation. Boom, it happens 4 hours later. And what happens is either the source comes from a VTR, live source, or stored on disk. It flows through a Tektronix encoder, which is physically stuffed in a SUN, physically stuffed in a Netra. Sits there, does its encoding thing on the left side, automatically the infrastructure set up, and it does its decode on the right-hand side, and is dumped to a file and or a VTR type device. So in that sense, it's functionally equivalent to buying a satellite slot or buying a Vivix transmission. Now, I might add, this is probably a good segue. The original plan for this product was to deploy it on the EIN. We're not doing that. Okay, we can't do that. In order for this notion of state scheduling and management of bandwidth to work, everybody needs to play by the same rules on the network. Okay? everybody is not playing by the same rules. Right now, what's being demonstrated with a couple of our pilot customers is basically a carefully managed subset of the broadband operating system on specific OC3 conduits. What we have elected to do, and the plan is, the ink is still wet on the plan, but we've got folks out cutting orders as we speak. We are moving to a separately provisioned, adjacent ATM-based network to actually get this job done. Okay? What we did is we went out and we looked at our sales queue. We went out and we looked at the timing for what ultimately is the go-forward network plan. And we said, we're going to leave several million on the table. We're going to leave more on the table than it would take to finance the whole infrastructure for integrated ATM video codecs and an outsourcing contract currently planned with Lucent. So the picture goes like this. Put an eraser to those boxes in the middle, bring in a third-party provider, and separately provisioned but adjacently managed ATM infrastructure. Now, it'll still be over IP in a sense that we'll actually be using transmission themes at the IP level, but those will be translated down to PVC and SVC controls at the ATM layer. For those of you that have been in the video industry, you probably said, geez, guys, why did it take you that long to figure that's what you had to do? Okay? We were waiting for the market and the technology to evolve to a point where we could guarantee transmission from point A to point B in a communally managed bandwidth environment, and we couldn't get there fast enough. We're going to learn a lot from this. We've got a number of John Griebling's network folks engaged. We have a plan now where actually as we provision this ATM network, we actually have a fold-over plan. So we will actually use all of the broadband operating system extensions. In one case, over on the ATM side, those are translated into things like virtual paths and PVCs and SVCs. You know, that's pretty straightforward stuff to lock down bandwidth in an ATM world. Over on the other side is our relationships with some folks like Cisco and Sycamore and whatnot evolve. We'll use IP abstractions directly. So we'll be using the standard DRR, weighted red, and all the other things over there. At some point, this will mature to the point where this isochronous world actually is today. But we got business, and you got to sell something. So I'm sensitive to that. We're going to get this up. All right, we currently have a timeline that says we're going to have this up in some 4 pilot markets over the next 4 months. What we also realized is that with the media transport product, we need to provide a level of customer care that we as a company are not suited to provide right now. Somebody needs to answer the telephone and answer questions about chroma levels, about bits, and about billing, all in one spot. We have not yet staffed the company with that degree of vertical nature. This is a network care function that frankly doesn't exist out there yet. So we're very tightly partnered with Lucent at this point, who is helping us actually build this functionality in an outsourced fashion, very carefully managed outsourced relationship. So they will basically be our video NOC, if you will, working closely with our layer 2 and layer 3 NOC. So that's all news to you folks, nothing in black and white. You'll see more over the next couple of weeks. I just wanted to take this opportunity to tell you some of the guts, how we got the courage to still draw this picture, knowing full well that we don't have all the broadband operating system hooks and handles deployed. We're going to do it over ATM. Okay? All right. So the occasional use product has these metrics. There's a preview column and there's a production column. Preview for us is a megabit worth of MPEG-1. Production is MPEG-2 with 4 different supported data rates. We accept currently analog or SDI inputs on a broadcast side. Audio, we still don't have more than 2 channels. I know that was a real strong push, but that's not available today. That will be available in about 4 months. That's a constraint on the codec board that we're using. And as we move to another solution, we're picking up another couple of channels of audio. So I appreciate your patience on that, but we don't have all the channels you feel you need right now. And it is a point-to-point product. And here's an example of how you get in and run it. Basically, you've got 2 things you can do, actually 4 things you can do from this screen. You can make a reservation, you can query about an available resources for a reservation. You can check one that's scheduled, and you can cancel one. You can't yet cancel one that's in progress. Sorry about that. We're working on that one too. But you can cancel a reservation that has not started yet. Okay, and this is all real stuff that's been tested fairly thoroughly on the original network when we had idle bandwidth time. Give it a source, give it a destination, specify the data rate, specify the video format input type, and set a time, and you're off. And we have, based on costing and based on competitive intelligence from near competitors in the market, developed a pricing model that looks like this. It's basically peak versus non-peak, 15-minute intervals as a function of data rate, with a little twist on it. If you want it within the next 4 hours, it's going to cost you this. If you give me 12 hours to fit that reservation, then it costs you less. If you got a whole day, it even costs you less. Okay, so it's broken down into peak and off-peak, 15-minute intervals, data rate, and the proximity or the nearness of your need for that bandwidth. And we're making progress. We're promising additional channels of audio out in actually Q3, Q2. It's going to be Q2. We have we will support PAL in Q2. We do support all those data rates. We will add HDTV support in Q2. Again, it's a codec issue. We're point-to-point now, adding multi-point capability later this year. We also will perform file transfers later in the year. And the UI, the user interface functionality is kind of spread out there. We don't currently have the ability to price quote clone or delete, or this low-cost finder was a terrific idea. We don't quite have that one yet either. I mean, tell me the cheapest way to get this from point A to point B. We don't do that yet. All right. So that was occasional use. That was somebody who isn't going to use it all the time. Now it's a different clientele that we've found from MarketBack that says we need somebody, we need a product for folks who are always connected, okay? And it begged a different kind of pricing model, a fixed rate, and it needed to be billed or presented forward as a near real-time service. The near real-time is important here. In the old days, it wasn't more than a month ago, it was primarily UDP-based. That's User Datagram Protocol. UDP are basically send and forget datagrams with no follow-on confirmation at the IP transport layer. That's how we got our latencies really down. There was no acknowledgement interval from sync to source, if you will. Well, that was causing us some problems. All the networking gear and all the computers and whatnot out there, the policy associated with UDP is if there's a problem, you are allowed to dump that datagram. So picture this, you know, you got the Tom Brokaw interview, and we're on air, and all of a sudden you take the face off President Clinton. That's a bad thing, okay? So we had to take a little step back after we failed some tests, okay? Take a little step back and say, what are we going to do? We got new specs now. We're not less than 500 milliseconds worth of latency. We're not. We're at about a second now because we added the acknowledgement interval that one picks up with TCP, okay? So that's why it's near real time now. All right. Dedicated use comes in a bunch of different flavors as well. Not quite so many codecs are supported at the MPEG-2 broadcast level. We got 3, 8, and 16. We do have the preview format. Same inputs are input types are basically supported. We still have the limitation on analog on audio channels. And this should look surprisingly similar to the last page we saw because it's basically the same codecs. It's the coder-decoder boards are basically what drive these specifications as a function of time. So here's where we're rolled out. Now, caveat. We do have equipment at these meet-me spots and whatnot in New York, LA, and Washington, okay, with a number of others installed. We are turned up for some functionality on the existing network in the top 3 markets we mentioned there. We are actually in a pilot phase with those. We are going to be moving those over as time permits over the next 4 months to an ATM infrastructure, as I mentioned. Okay, so we shouldn't see any interruption in any of the pilot activity we have going on. It's basically a call on my part and John Griebling's part that we can cut this thing over carefully and gracefully and not wind up stepping on traffic for the other product that's running on the network now, the MediaCast product. But we'll complete that transition. Those markets will see a little or no interruption of service, and then we'll continue to turn up other markets in time. Okay, and this is the current plan in terms of quarters as a function of this year. We know what the CPE is, the customer prime equipment is. We know how to build these things. We're basically going to make the network cut over and go like hell.
What about across to Europe, John? Are you working on what's the time frame getting it into Europe?
Very honestly, the meetings have just started to get an understanding of what transatlantic bandwidth we're going to need to actually support that. There's a suspicion it's not just an in-country product, it's probably an import-export product. There are a bunch of things we have to look at in terms of network design, as these are not small streams. These are pretty heavy. I mean, my experience was, for example, that there's a lot of asymmetry under the ocean, and there's a tremendous opportunity to bring content over here that some have missed on several transatlantic lines. So I wouldn't doubt that over the next 2-3 weeks, I know we're going to be working with Elliott and company and his team to put 3 things on the international roadmap. Let me segue for just a moment. We got 3 products we're working on right now. We actually have about 5 or 6, but I can't tell you about the other ones or I'd have to shoot you. But the 3 that are above the radar screen, cast, transport, and conferencing, are all now going to have an international flavor. We are initially going to start with the easy markets, the ones we can really understand that aren't going to push us towards a multi-byte character set. But as soon as we start grossly tailoring the product and having to add regional specifics and tweaking on top of multi-byte characters and changing functionality, obviously that takes time. If it's just we're changing the CPE in terms of power supplies and some other logistics and dealing with import-export issues and depoting and whatnot, those logistics we're going to start knocking them out in a product-specific basis. So, for example, it's strongly believed we'll have a London version of MediaCast in the release 3 of the MediaCast product. Just seems like the right thing to do. We're going to do the same with transport, and we're going to do the same with conferencing. Conferencing is actually probably going to be a little bit accelerated based on some positive commercial relationships we have there. But no dates. As soon as I know what they are, we'll use a forum like this to communicate them. So we now have to figure out how to structure a go-to-market strategy that says, geez, who are the legacy guys in Tampa Bay? Geez, got a few stadiums, I got this, I got that. How am I going to actually turn this into a product that makes us not just a cost savings tool, but actually they see us as an additional revenue generator. All right. One of the issues we're confronted with, and what's really stymied us here, is, there are really 2. One is we typically go in and hit the traffic guy at the network. Well, the traffic guy has no exposure or access to rights and rebroadcast, retransmission rights on content. We're in at the wrong level. We got to see what we can do to fix that. Okay. But on a second point, for a lot of the sports venues and some other events, it's been our experience that they're taking them right off the table. You won't find anybody that yet has gone and given the NBA or the NFL a killer deal for an exclusive lock up their content, get it on the web. They see that as an attack on the current value of their product. It cannibalizes their ad value for over-air broadcasting. We got to figure out how to fix that too. We got to go in there and say it's not going to hurt, it's going to help. It's a different revenue generator. I mean, don't tell them that people are going to stop watching TV and they're now going to look at a DSL rendering or something like that. Nah, it's a little different. You can do all these other things. This is new revenue. So we got to think through some of that. So it's great that the technology would allow us to publish this thing on a web, but I believe our biggest barrier is trying to articulate how we might even get in there and get our proposition made. That was kind of difficult. Anybody follow what I just said? All right. Okay, well, we got a bunch of other things folks are asking us to do. As we carriage this video out to the web, they're looking at watermarking technologies and Virage and all these other tools that would allow us to better catalog, encrypt, et cetera, all their video assets. So we're taking a look at basically the financial worthiness of moving up the value chain that I just showed you on that first page. So we're taking a look at that, but we're not taking our eye off the ball. We got a lot of very tactical, deployment-oriented work to do over the next 4 months as we move over to an ATM-based network. Has anybody got any questions on transport? Fire away.
How do you get, do you need do you have beta, sorry, I forgot the word already. I'm calling it a beta customer, whatever, in Washington. You said you have some in some of the 3 markets.
Yeah, we have the primary beta customer for us today is some of our folks at NBC. And in fact, they've got news bureaus and assets in the DC market. Right now, the big test we have running right now, has been running for quite a while, is the New York to DC markets. You know, so we're filling a piece of the current network pretty heavily with MPEG transport there. And this is where we learned a lot of these little nuances about, oops, dropped a datagram, bad thing. You know.
So you're not looking, you want that, so you're going to keep that pretty close and just use NBC timing and pilot.
I think it's fair, yes. We can take more. I'll handle them in a case-by-case basis, because very honestly, we have bandwidth today. When we finish signing up all these other MediaCast customers, our model says we're not going to have any bandwidth. You know, we got some strangulated OC3s in some of those markets that just plain fundamentally limit what we can do.
And then my other real quick one was, what exactly is the customer access like? How are they going to connect?
In a case of NBC, for example, we're just using the TV1 circuits they have in place, right down to waterfront. Same. They've got it. We put our gear in at the Vivix POP, basically. So we leave all the local loop stuff the same.
John, just very briefly, but I mean, you talked about, you know, migrating this platform to a separate ATM-based network and having Lucent be like the traffic cop for us. I mean, when I think of Lucent, I think about telephones and networking equipment. I don't think of them being, you know, broadcast and video-friendly people. Can you maybe help educate us
Sure.
about that?
Sure. We went out to 3 different ATM equipment providers in this space, and the short list contained only 4 and Lucent. Lucent has actually been in the integrated codec ATM switch market for about 5 years now. And if you want to go out and buy an industry standard product, which actually does what we're talking about, basically has a YUV hose on it on this end and squirts bits out the other end, there's but 2 places to go, Lucent and 4. Okay? 4 didn't come back with any understanding of what the service proposition was. They basically came back with a deal that said, oh, hey, here, buy these switches, we'll give you a hell of a discount. Buy these endpoint equipment, we'll give you a big discount. Lucent came back with, we think your problem's really going to be the video knock, this, that, and the other thing. Here's the pricing, here's how we grow it in Denver, and so forth and so on. We like their equipment. It's proven. It's been around. We've got several people already in the company who are comfortable with it. Furthermore, there's been a commitment on their part that as we start the integration into the go-forward network, as we basically hang the broadband operating system over it, they have no problem with actually rolling out Cisco gear as switches and infrastructure adjacent to their Lucent endpoints. So just commercially, it came together. Their prices were better anyway, and we got a full-service turnkey offering from them. So the next presentation I'm going to go into, you'll quickly detect the other reason why we selected Lucent is with their commitment to build a video NOC in the Denver area, we get the video conferencing thing handled. You know, we basically kill 2 birds with 1 stone there.
Are you seeing at this point, just open like one video
Sure. That's a very good point. It's a very good point. We have not assimilated those requirements yet, but I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. Any other in the back?
John, what are the plans to do multicasting in the ATM network? What are their plans?
Well, if we go back to the point-to-multi-point commitment in the Q3, Q4 kind of time frame, it's there. And frankly, I think we can get there faster, than if we stuck in an IP-only layer.
I have one more question. Is it always planned to do the encoding within the cloud, the IM cloud?
No, there has been discussions about having different terminations. There have been some. Get to John Svetko with what you think that additional customer input is and try to help him put a value on it. It's not that hard. I shouldn't have said that, but we could probably support it.
Start mixing expression schemes. For example, CNN is on a Sony-based encoder. For MPEG, they start handing MPEG off. You have different encoders within the cloud. You don't have incompatibility problems. Not all MPEG encoders. Although there's an MPEG standard, the algorithms they use to achieve that aren't always compatible. They have some artifacts. You got a Sony on one end and a TNN on the other.
There are a couple of important issues real quickly to touch upon in that arena. Is right now we're still trying to decide between an RFC that puts MPEG payload directly in ATM cells and what we really want to do, which is insert an IP layer, just for some management and control purposes, and to make our transition to the EIN easier. What you're talking about may beg one solution or the other. If they are not RFC so-and-so compliant, maybe right now we got to say no. You think about the whole value chain. We want the whole value chain. And I personally really don't feel like tearing the whole problem apart and saying we're a cheap pipe. All right, because this whole deal is the price of bandwidth is going through the floor. Our whole game is to try to figure out how to add value to it and lock it in. So get to John with your thoughts, would you? Thanks.
Do you expect the rate card to change that from ATM?
No. Our current plan is no. We've already done an economic analysis based on the existing pricing and found quite an advantage in keeping it this way. So it won't go down, no.
And is that going to get rid of the real-time issue?
It should. I know exactly what you're saying, and it should. Okay. Any other video conferencing is much quicker. Any other questions? All right. So now we're going to segue to that other little heard of product, video conferencing. Boy, it has stuck its head up and down. How many times now? Like 3 since this company got launched? What's it? The video conferencing product has basically tracked the market in this arena. It's been a very exciting topic every now and then in the networking community. And we've kind of paid the price in that our market back has not been consistent and it's not been clear, and we haven't been able to completely quantify demand beyond simply a couple of high-end consulting reports. And they are very inconsistent, and depending on which one you choose, you could build a totally different business model. Okay? So what we're all about right now is being pragmatic. We are out there working with people, working with customers, and allowing them to directly drive what our product requirements are and which vendors we're going to work with. If this were a huge, well-defined market, we'd be in this thing with both feet right now. But how many of us are using desktop-based IP video conferencing? You remember ProShare? Does anybody remember ProShare? Right? There you go. Classic example. Great idea. Any day now. Where'd it go? It's complex. Delivery within the enterprise of say, an IP multicast signal is tougher than it sounds. A lot of you know that. People don't like to forward that stuff. So kind of ditch that one, push that one off, because I'm not going to have a plurality of unicast streamed in my enterprise. Okay, it's multicast or nothing. 1, 2. Send it to go look at the home environment. Go look at the outside the enterprise environment. And go find enough people that have anything greater than an ISDN line that would really care. Okay, you're not dying to call grandma yet, are you? So it's just kind of nascent. What we've attached ourselves to now is, again, kind of like transport. We look at an existing market. That existing market is conference rooms. Okay, it may not have the huge zippy appeal that everybody would like. But it's clearly, to put an IP infrastructure underneath what used to be an ISDN infrastructure, it's kind of a yin and a yang. It's cheaper, and it may even have more functionality in terms of the ability to connect. but it's also something the market doesn't identify as broken. You know, the market has not been clamoring around, geez, I really got to ditch that ISDN line and go with some internet replacement. They ain't saying that. Okay, so we are wading into this very slowly, methodically, with a fair amount of analysis and analytic support out of some folks here in Houston. And I just want to show you what the timeline appears to be right now. Let me segue for a moment and go to dashboards. You'll see more and more of these from me on a per-product basis. Dashboard's a simple concept, kind of like a scorecard. Once a week or once a month it's updated to show you, the folks who are responsible for communicating our message out to the market, where we're at. On the lower left-hand corner, there's a risk abatement plot. Okay, risk as a function of time. All right. If risk in this case we determined didn't get down below an average measure of 10, we couldn't launch the product. There are too many outstanding risks. Those risks included we didn't have a partnership, we didn't have a network to implement it on, we did not have any kind of venture or equity positions in those partners. We had no leverage, and we had no detailed specification and plan for going forward. So other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? I mean, it's a pretty tough story. Okay, so Gary Waxman and company are out there beating this thing up pretty good, working directly with the sales force and trying to fill in all these voids. We got a couple of equity relationships and partnerships I can't really talk about now, but we've also now built a team of people whose job it is to make that risk curve go down. And I forget what the number is, but between the four of them we've just added, we got 35 years of video conferencing experience. Okay, so we've got some of the best people stolen from some of the best companies now that are working this turf. All right, and they've been working in this arena for a while, and we're going to have a product. All right, we don't believe we're going to have it right away. I'll get to timeline in a moment. But this dashboard basically will tell you the risks that we have outstanding, give you a quick update of status. It should be telling you in the future the three things that product team decided they wanted to share with you, and we can interact on how they alter this, but they wanted to propose to you three metrics that were important to them in the design of this thing. The number of conferences conducted per quarter, the number of endpoints actually deployed or signed up on this system, and the revenues that this thing just generated. And there's a blue and a red line there. One line is indicative of basically a completely outsourced potential relationship. It starts up faster and gets us moving quicker with a brand name in the market, but long term, we're not sure it's going to generate all the revenue. If we take a little bit more time to build a little bit more world-class infrastructure, like an EIN or an ATM underlayment for that, then all of a sudden the red line becomes viable. They'll all come to us, and we'll basically private label everybody. Okay, so that's kind of where our head's at right now, like 30,000 feet, and we're working a number of different vendors to see what their appetite is in those two different arenas. The roadmap, the fine print. Most of you can't read it, so I'll just kind of like hit the highlights. It's talking about quarters, okay, and moving from a pilot phase, which is active now, through phase 1 and 2 in the second and third quarters of this year. And we're basically assuming all this is based upon the transport product driving the ATM infrastructure and the access of an ISDN dial-up infrastructure to get us started. And we've already identified how we're going to do that with a couple of vendors and a couple of carriers. The focus initially is in the financial services market. By phase 2, we believe we're going to have a pretty generic product. Okay. Initially, as I mentioned, the room-to-room thing is where it's at, because it's well understood. It's not a moving target. We know how to go after it. If we can solve those problems, which are simpler, we'll then move down the food chain and go for some of the other connected products. So we are going to be deploying on this ATM network initially to support some pilot testing in primarily a states-based market on the eastern seaboard. We are also talking right now with Jeff Foster and company about what we're going to do in that market and how, what, and when we're going to actually provision bandwidth back and forth potentially to get that job done. So the model kind of goes like this. We would initially use this alternative network with an outsourced provider, basically, to manage the provisioning of conferences with standard old MCU-style paradigms, advancing in time to a web-based schedule-yourself kind of environment that allows you to set up multi-point conferences. So that's generally where we're at.